I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. Before I get into the episode this week, I wanted to make a quick announcement. Our very own Cameron Clark is going to be reading, I think he's doing the opening reading for a poetry symposium called The Critical Path. It's sponsored by Think. I feel like I'm doing an advertisement for Think Journal here, but I'm not. I'm doing an advertisement for Cameron. He's reading a couple of poems at the very beginning of the symposium. It's this Thursday, which, if you're listening to this the day it comes out, is tomorrow, October 24th at 11 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. There are a bunch of other smart poetry folks reading and speaking. Elijah's doing a talk as well. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But go check out Cameron's reading at 11 a.m. U.S. Eastern, Thursday, October 24th. I'll put a link in the show notes. So I did just get back from the ALCW conference. It went pretty well, I think. I read with Ryan Wilson and Chris Childers. Mary Jo ended up not being able to make it, so Ryan filled in for her. But it went well. I talked to Dan Tobin, Sunil Iyengar, I finally met in person, David Yezi, John Poach, Austin Allen, Austin's lovely wife Portia, a number of different people. Alice Rachel, poet from Atlanta, I met. Martha Hollander, Nathaniel Rudofsky Brody. I'm going to try to get him on the show at some point, and I may be doing a reading with him in New York. Michael Devine, a lot of people. Poetry, critical and otherwise. Rosanna Warren said hi, which is nice of her. David Havard, a number of the ALCW old guard. I sat on one panel. There was a reading, Leslie Tenorio, whose work I did not know, read. He was a good reader, like the rare good reader of, fiction is often, like short fiction often is not much better in person at a reading than poetry, but he read actually quite well. I think it was partly because he chose something sort of like with a lot of dialogue to it and sort of straightforward, easily digestible action. I sat in on one scholarly panel on translation, and I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit with Jonathan. So the episode I have for you today was a lost episode. It was not in my queue. I had recorded it, completely forgotten about it. And then I happened to recover it when I was doing some data consolidation recently. It's a great conversation. I recorded it with Jonathan Farmer and Alice a couple months ago. About the first half is about attention and about the sort of wild New Yorker article, but it ends up really being about sort of what we do with art, like what art is for and what we actually do with it when we sit down to look at it, read it, take it in. The second part is about success and failure and fitting in the arts. That is going to be up on The Secret Show. I'm going to try to release them basically simultaneously. I think The Secret Show episode will come out maybe an hour after the main feed episode. But you can go check that out at sleerickets.substack.com. If you put in your email address, I will give you a week's access for free. And after that, it's pretty fucking cheap. So I'm giving it a separate title, but it's the second. Really, it's going to pick up exactly where this first half breaks off. We do also briefly in the second half talk a little bit about sort of preparation for a couple of episodes. One that I did end up recording and that is now out on the Poetry Says feed that I recorded with Alice, and then one I'm planning to record this coming week with Jonathan. So you hear a little bit of behind the scenes stuff there. It gets a little personal, which is why I thought it was sort of more suitable for the Secret Show feed for all three of us. Really, it's quite personal, but I hope you will find it as enjoyable as I did. Jonathan, by the way, is the author of not only that peculiar affirmative book of essays on poetry, but also a more recent review of Jose Olivares. And it's a review I mentioned a number of times on the show that I read in draft form. It is out now, and I will put a link to all of that in the show notes. Now here's my conversation with Jonathan and Alice.
He seems to, those New Yorker sort of book reviews where it's really just like a fancy Reader's Digest. It's like he's doing that for a number of pages, and then all of a sudden he does this kind of fake out thing where he's like, oh, and by sheer coincidence, I remember this thing. and then it just turns
Absolutely
into
not. I
um,
do
uh,
not believe any of that shit for
yeah.
a second.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I
we need
was
to
sort
explain
of
it better.
I was sort of baffled by this article,
Yeah,
particularly by
baffled
the
is
I
the
think
word.
maybe the most baffling part of it was the subhead, the deck. How do we hold on to what matters in a distracted age? That
Yeah,
feels
once again, we don't
like
find anything
very
out about that.
vaguely the theme of like the first like 700 words, and then after that, then for the next 20,000 words, it's about something completely different.
It's like he's saying the way to hold on to what matters in a distracted age is to join a secret society of people who meet up in museums and stare at artworks and then go and have coffee.
And
That's
occasionally
one
yell at
way.
a police officer, "I'm a statue."
Which I had to give credit to the police officer. Like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Like whether in that mind that was like, oh, this is a performance, or oh, this is an insane person, or oh, this is a New Yorker subscriber, like whatever it was. He was like, all right, I'm gonna let this go.
Yeah.
At the risk of being the liberal caricature that I am, I definitely read that and thought, what's the line, like whiteness is a hell of a drug or whatever? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
Yeah.
true.
think they
They're getting
said
away
what
with a
race the
lot.
person was, but I felt pretty safe in assuming that was a white person who got away with that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It
Can
definitely
I
smelled like liberal arts college.
can I attempt like because it's 11:15, which is 2 hours and 15 minutes past my bedtime.
Oh, good Lord.
So
Yeah,
can I attempt to summarize the
please.
article and do my bit, and then slowly my brain will melt and I will just, become monosyllabic. But to let people know what the hell we're talking about, this is an article in the New Yorker by staff writer Nathan Heller. It's called The Battle for Attention. Subhead: How do we hold on to what matters in a distracted age? The first, third, fifth of it is some very standard hand wringing about attention span. Phones are killing your brain. You should be very worried. And then the writer expects us to believe that he just so happened to go to this lecture at New York Public Library or something. And he just so happened to run into this guy called D. Gordon Burnett. He just so
E.
happened to
Graham
go to
Burnett, sorry.
his Graham Burnett. He went to his house. He saw this book on his sideboard that just so happened to remind him of this secret society called the Order of the Third Bird. And wow, amazing. Burnett is a member of the Order of the Third Bird, and this is some secret society that apparently exists everywhere where people meet up at museums and programmatically stare at and then don't stare at and then think about and then talk about artwork. And then he goes on about that for just so long. And every
Except,
time he
except he
gets into
briefly,
description,
except he briefly interrupts it at one point to talk about going to the Apple store and trying on the
oh
3D.
yeah,
Yeah,
he's like,
what
yeah,
was
then I
that?
Yeah.
went to the Apple store and I tried on those glasses. That was bad. Anyway, back to birds. It's so badly written. And the thing about it is like it's so fucking long that you can't stay with it. And then you feel bad because you're like, oh fuck, I want to check my email. And then you end
Yeah.
up doing what he's complaining about. And I just think that that's very irritating because this is a 700 word piece hiding in amongst what, 5,000 words?
It's quite long.
And I refuse to feel bad about not being able to pay attention to the whole thing. It's really poorly written.
To do the classic Brian Platzer thought experiment real quick, how does your assessment change if this is fiction?
Oh, it's worse, I think.
Oh, it's worse. I feel like it might be better. Like I feel like it's
Um,
still not brilliantly written. It still doesn't have much shape to it, but I feel like there's a version of this complete with the total like left swerve that is like a Borges story. So like the Order of the Third Bird would be more sinister, and there would be something like vaguely supernatural but not quite, and it would still be like 700 words.
Actually, yeah, no, now, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah,
Because he did
okay.
because I don't think any of his stories is even close to this long.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is like there's a I think in I'm trying to think like in Nathan Heller's mind, what was this? Like what is this? What is the ideal version of this as he imagines it to be? Like, is it what does he think people are going to think when they read it? Like, they're
So
going to be,
I can't figure out if he hadn't assigned. So one of the book that he's quasi seems to be quasi reviewing here is a book that was edited by Burnett and one other person. And so I can't tell if he was assigned an article about that book, but really just wanted to write about the birds. And so, like, tried to just get away with it. Or if he thinks he's like, it's clear that he's most interested. He really wants to write about the birds.
he really wants to join the birds and write
Yeah.
about the birds. It
No, I
seems
mean
like
he really, like, by the end he's like,
Yeah.
he effectively has joined
this
the
was like the
birds.
most meaningful experience of my
Yeah.
No, no, that's not what he says. He doesn't say the most meaningful. It'd be so good if he did. But he says, it was one of the most real things I have
Oh
ever
God.
seen.
Oh, that was so
What
bad.
does that even mean, Nathan?
The most real
Get a
things you've ever
grip.
seen. Oh, it's under. I
Yeah.
was trying to. I didn't underline much, but I underlined a group of birds have had a couple of residencies through the support of the artist Robert Wilson. Do y'all know Robert Wilson? He's a
life.
performance artist. Holy shit. Hands down, the most annoying artist I studied anywhere in drama school. Like his work came up both as an undergrad and in graduate school. The worst, most obnoxious, like self-conscious performance art, like the most bullshitty bullshit that you can imagine. So yeah, reading that they were affiliated felt like, yeah,
Fits
that's
right
about right.
in. Yeah.
Mhm.
So can I, like, introduce a small tangent and then a big tangent?
Please.
Please,
So
please get us away from this thing.
I'm the one who sent this article, and I agree. It's a Alice, you said dog's breakfast. That's yes. There's one other element in here that got on my nerves, which is there's this argument he seems to be playing out at a couple of points that maybe the problem isn't really our attention or the things that are affecting our attention, but that really the ways we measure attention are a function of our kind of cultural moment. And then also this, like, even weirder claim to me that the technologies we create don't shape us so much as, like, our historical context sort of conjures them. So, like, the Industrial Revolution is a product of, like, people wanting efficiency or something.
Mm.
And, like, I think there's, like, that's one of those things that's, like, a little bit true. Like, it's a tertiary point, but it turns into this really sort of frustrating refusal to see what's actually in front of us. Like, I do think the attention issues are real. Like, I do think the way that technology is affecting, and he even gives data that suggests that, and then it's like he forgets gave that data.
Sorry, sorry. There was a thing you said. The thesis that technology shapes the way we think about memory or the way we even experience memory is
Not the
has
technology, not the
sorry.
technology,
Yeah.
but our era, our cultural moment.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
he talks about, like, how the way we thought about attention at one point was like, I can't remember exactly what it did, but, like, there was a culture of vigilance, and so, like, we really we were like, we wanted to understand, I think, like, how to have soldiers be good snipers or something, and so, like, our
Oh right,
understanding
right.
of
Yeah,
attention
yeah,
was
yeah.
really focused on vigilance, and I, I'm sure there's some truth to that, but I also think that's not, like, what we understand about attention is true beyond just the way our cultural moment shades it.
Because he makes a big point about the figure paying attention.
Yeah.
That attention is something you pay, or that's a construct of our era. It feels a little bit unconvincing
Mhm.
throughout, but you're suggesting that basically, like, there are parts of attention that are not culturally constructed that he's treating as if they're culturally constructed.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Let me see
Like,
if I
what are
can.
the kind of the essential parts of attention that?
So at one point he says, let me see if I can find it. Something to the effect of, like, maybe we don't really have, like, a crisis of attention. It's just that all the stuff we're measuring is about the way people interact with like shitty content online, and in fact, our attention hasn't changed at all.
It
Yeah,
seems
I
like
think I know the bit you're talking about.
it just seems like such a
It's
hard
actually a
case to
measurement
make.
crisis.
Yeah.
Our theory of our attention crisis is that it's actually a measurement crisis because the signals we are focused on define our understanding of the field. If attention entails a battle for our immediate gaze, then that gaze becomes a valuable commodity more than a slow accruing mental simmer. So, yeah, I see what you mean. It's like everybody's focused on like eye tracking, like where are
Mhm.
people looking on the page? Where do we need to put our content? You've got to make it shorter, get it up near the top left, that kind of thing. But that's not attention. Like
Mhm.
the slow accruing mental simmer and that are two different things.
Yeah. So somehow like our attention is fine. We're just measuring what happens when we're like on Facebook.
It seemed
Yeah.
like a weird because I thought he made a pretty good case that eye movement was not a great measurement of attention, but that's not the same case as saying, and thus our attention has not changed. It's like
Right.
eye movement, patterns have changed or are trackable in a particular way, and that's useful to know. And that is in fact separate from attention. He uses the example of the exercise where you look in one direction while thinking about something in the corner of your vision,
Hmm.
and so you see like your attention is actually a separate thing from where your eye is looking. That seems very convincing, and like I'm you don't have to work hard to convince me that many psychosocial experiments are sketchy in their measurement criteria, but that is very different than saying like, and so maybe nothing has changed. It feels a little bit to me like there's a famous argument that has been famously debunked that language shapes the way we think. And the
Yes.
example that's frequently given is that there are, I forget exactly what it is, but there's like there are more words for blue in Russian than there are in other languages, and there was no word for blue in ancient Greek. And so maybe they actually see blue differently, and they're
Hmm.
experiencing different things in their cones, or I think the rods are the black and white, and the cones are the color. And and that has been debunked. Like, no, they don't see a different blue. And no, probably the ancient Greeks didn't not see, like, couldn't not see blue. They just had different words for things. But like that kind of severe, immediately measurable result doesn't bear out, does not seem to me to debunk the larger thesis that, like, of course you're like the language you speak shapes the way you think about the world. Of course it is. I don't think it shapes the way you think about the world in necessarily like immediately concrete, immediately measurable ways, but it seems crazy to suggest that it doesn't shape the way you think about the world at all. And similarly here, I think like these are very limited and flawed, systems for measuring attention, and yet it seems pretty self-evident, as you said, like something has changed.
And he even gives lots of evidence earlier on that suggests that something really has changed.
You know?
But that's just a side tangent. So the reason I sent this article is that I'm kind of fascinated by the birds, by this secret society.
Do you want to introduce what they are actually? I don't think
Yeah.
we've said, right?
So they're a secret society that claims or likes to suggest that they go back, that they're like an ancient secret society, but seem to have really just come up like in the last 10 or 15 years or something. And the name, the Order of the Third Bird, comes from some legend that there was a painting and three birds encountered, and I think one ignored it, one tried to eat the fruit in the painting, and then the third bird just looked at the painting. And so they're like the third bird that just looks at the painting, that doesn't try and do anything with it. And so basically, it's this very decentralized kind of thing where anyone can call. I think they refer to it as an action. And they just send out a BCC'd email to a bunch of people and say, kind of be in this place around this time. And everybody shows up. And they don't tell you what work of art you're going to be attending to. You're just supposed to be able to figure it out because it's the one that needs attention.
And the example
Um,
they give is like the picture that's on the opposite wall from the Mona Lisa.
yeah, or the one that's like next to the bathroom or something.
Yeah.
And so then you go through these. They say it's 4 stages. It's really more than that, and they're like structured so that each stage lasts 7 minutes. So the first one you just kind of mill around, and then I think the second one everybody stands and stares at it, and the third one everybody just acts really weird and kind of ignores the painting or whatever the work of art
They're
is.
negating it.
Yeah.
They're, yeah.
Trying to clear their minds. there's one other step, and then there's a fifth step where they write down everything that they experience, and then there's a sixth step actually where they go and like meet up at a coffee shop or a bar, and everybody talks about what they felt.
Okay. And this is,
And
and these
there's
are the names are, the first step is encounter, the second step is attending, the third step is negation, and the fourth step is realizing.
and then again there are two more after that that they don't seem to have names for.
Colloquy, right? Yeah.
And so this fascinates me, one, because I could never do this.
You
I
never
would
do it?
I could never do it. I would be so massively uncomfortable.
You could never do it in a
Ah.
group of people.
Yeah.
Like you could never go do it as a
I
way
mean,
to, yeah.
even doing it on my own, I think I'd struggle with it. It just seems to me, at least in the way I interact with my psyche, to be designed to generate maximum self-consciousness.
Yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
okay, I am doing this thing with this work of art now. I am going to respond to it in these ways. And now I'm going to respond to it. And like, just as soon as I have a program for what I'm supposed to do with something, like that, it's like there's a right answer. It's sort of like how I used to experience religion. There's a right answer and I can't know it. And so I would just be freaking out all the time. And then especially that at the end of all of this, you get together with everybody and you describe your experience where you've done this supposedly profound thing. And like, it would be so hard for me not to try and perform for everybody else and sound more intelligent. I'd probably have this like nagging feeling of I'm the freak or the asshole who just felt uncomfortable the whole time, or just like in spite of the instructions was thinking I don't really like this painting. Um, like
There's a reason this is next to the bathroom.
yeah, like there's just no moment when I wouldn't be painfully self-conscious in this.
Hmm.
Can I
Um,
identify what to me was like a crucial ingredient that might alter this in your assessment? I'm
mhm,
curious. To me, that the really, really crucial ingredient, because they they say like when you first walk into the room, the birds could be anybody, and they're
mhm.
kind of making some assessments. I mean, of course, like again, do they look like they're white and they went to a liberal arts college? Feels like a very, very good guide. Not always, and they make a point about how it's become more diverse in certain ways, and some of the attention, theories have been dispersed beyond their
Mhm.
initial milieus. But you go into the room, you don't know which painting it is, you don't know who's a bird, and then a lot of the activities look like doing other things in the room, like not looking at the painting. And and so to me, the sort of the most perfect version of this would be almost exactly the same, but you remove the final thing she gives him right before he leaves, when he's going to go
Mhm.
participate in one of these activities, which is a
Right.
little saffron length of ribbon on his belt loop, because that's what identifies you as a bird. So
Right.
that when you see the other people in the room with the saffron ribbons on, you say, ah, okay, right. So those are the other birds. So I'm going to go participate with them. And then we're all going to go to a cafe afterward. To me, like the truly Borgesian version of this would be there are no saffron ribbons. You don't know. And in fact, like they only give you a city rather than a room in a museum. And you go to this place and like, you don't know what you're like, you could be participating with other birds, but maybe colloquy looks like all of you walking in separate directions and thinking your thoughts separately. And so, in fact, you're always participating in an action, and just sort of heightens your sense of awareness of your daily life. Like it's the lottery in Babylon, rendered New Yorker, digestible. But like having the saffron ribbons on your belt loops to me is like, okay, suddenly this is something like you have a badge to identify you as being important, and you can recognize other people who are also in your tier, and then you can also know who you're supposed to go have coffee with and who you're not supposed to go have coffee with. And so, like, then as you suggested, like we're dealing with a different activity altogether than the activity of paying attention to a work of art.
Yeah. Though their claim, and like I'm not here to like shit on the birds. Like I really do find them kind of fascinating. Um, but their claim is that there is something profound enough about this, altering enough, that you would know anyways. If you were looking for it, you would pick it up anyways.
What would you pick up though? Like you would pick up which painting it was supposed to be. You would pick up which. group it would be.
Yeah, you would pick up the group. Like there's something.
They have an energy about them.
Mhm.
But then again, you're
It's
paying
like,
attention to something else, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
You
and
know?
so yeah, and that like part of why I'm fascinated by this and recoil at this at the same time is that I think like this is a sort of much more hip or maybe equally hip version of what we're doing all the time. Or maybe it's just what I'm doing all the time and then projecting onto everybody else because I'm a neurotic freak. But there are like these various moments in here where people talk about this sense of like, when I was in college, I would read these poems or, study this. And like there was this great sense of potential and purpose.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then I became a professor and that wasn't it. So like what this gets at for me is this question that I've mentioned to you all for me of like, what do we do with art that really genuinely confounds me? And I think one thing that happens, because I do suspect I'm not the only person who feels this way, is that we create programs so that there is something for us to do. There's this one artist who complains that she would spend all this time making a work of art, and then there'd be an exhibition for it, and like people would do this weird awkward dance in front of it for like 15 seconds and then walk away. And I've definitely done that dance, and in some ways I've even done a version of that where I read a poem I like. I'm like, okay, so now what? Is it just okay, I had 90 seconds of pleasure, and like it's enough to just be pleased for 90 seconds? Something in me is sufficiently deformed to distrust it. I can watch a TV show and just enjoy myself and get lost in it, or I can read a book and just enjoy myself and get lost in it. But with a poem, and even more so with a painting, because I'm just horrible at processing things like visual works of art, I'm stymied. And I think what we tend to do is we create structures and activities, because one of the things we want is we want this to be a shared experience. We want it to have some like social value or social meaning. And there's this thing with the birds where they end up being really prescriptive. They're like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And it starts to have this kind of rigidity that makes perfect sense to me if you're going to have this kind of programmatic thing. And it seems to me to sort of ratify their experience of art. And there's this other, sorry, I'm going on.
No, no.
There's this other element where like one of the things that you're supposed to think about is what does the work of art need?
Mm.
Yeah. That's
And
that.
like
Yeah.
that for me is kind of revealing because it does like it's looking for some purpose.
What is he
What am I
trying to
doing?
say?
Yeah, what can I do? How can I contribute? And so much of this seems to be people trying like people trying to find a way of making something, so much so that they end up creating this massive book that's kind of like fake but earnest studies of their practice. So this
Oh
is this
God,
is
yeah, they like a colossal. They have this like colossal,
yes.
colossal volume of like fake academic papers about the birds, but they're never allowed to talk about the action specifically. But it does seem like that becomes the main show for a lot of them.
Yeah.
I think I have similar ambivalence to you about responding to works of art, and I think like when I imagine the argument that in my mind it's always like somebody like Shane or Ryan or Cameron would make about some poem that I find impenetrable and punishing to read, and they would say, but aren't you in this in order to like get more out of it? Shouldn't you really marinate in it and spend time with it and chew it and think about it and draw what there is to draw out of it, and then eventually you'll be rewarded by it, and that's the prize of the work of art. And I think like there are, because I definitely enjoy spending a lot of time with a poem, but I think there's like a really important distinction between two kinds of analysis, that like one of which feels to me very, very valuable, and one of which feels to me like a lot less valuable. So there is analysis that is, what does this mean? How can I draw out of it what is really happening? Initially, it's a smooth surface, it's impenetrable, it's opaque. But if I really spend time with it, and I start to notice these funny little details, I start to notice how certain choices align, then I can start to figure out, maybe he's really talking about his mother. Oh, okay. Like, I mean, this is what comes to mind is the friend who does a book club, and he talked about reading sonnets to my American Sonnets to My Past and Future Assassin, the Terrence Hayes book, and he said I was really disappointed by your review because you seemed dismissive of it. I said I don't think I was dismissive of it. I think I was critical, but I think it has a lot of value. And he said no, but I read it and I thought this is nothing. And then I went to a book club and we talked about it for hours, and we drew out all these symbols and all these themes and motifs that I hadn't even realized were there. And we ended up having a wonderful time talking about all these sort of secret things that were happening inside the book. And I said, well, that's great, but you could do that with any book. Like, I don't think that was actually what was there in that book. I think that was you having a great time drawing out themes with your friends. I could be wrong. It could be that book is way more meticulously composed than I give it credit for. But I tend to think like that's a fun exercise you can perform with just about any text. The type of analysis I always find rewarding, by contrast, is here's a poem. It has this effect on me. How does it do that? Like, how does it do the thing that it does? It had like the effect should be there. It's not that I think it should be totally effortless. It's not that I think it should, hit you as you're crossing the street and not paying attention to it. But I think, a reasonably attentive reader, it should have an effect on that person. And then what I want to know is, how does it produce that? Because I want to steal it. Like, and to me, that's like a writerly mode of analysis that makes a lot of sense. And I could spend a lot of time doing that. Whereas a kind of an investigative readerly mode of analysis, I find quite contrary. Like, that's what's valuable to do with dreams, I think. Like, it's something I've been doing with dream. I've had some memorable, big, vivid dreams lately, and I've spent some time, and it is a little bit onerous to kind of like think, all right, okay, how am I thinking about this? But I think the value in it is it's about me. It's my mind. It's about figuring out what's going on with me. And so, of course, it matters to me. I would never ask somebody else to spend time doing that. It also wouldn't be particularly meaningful for somebody else to spend time with doing that because it's all built on my associations. But I think with a poem, like, I don't necessarily want to spend time in that way. I have another thought about the birds, but yeah, I don't want to go on too long. Alice, you have thoughts about any of this nonsense?
That's where I just feel like such a basic, really. I mean, I never worry about this. I've never worried about like, what should I do? Like, do for who? Like, for the artist? What? Like, who is this responsibility to? I just have never even considered this as a problem. Now it's a new problem, so I've got to add it to my list of problems. But I just have never. I think I stop at the moment of effect. I'm not even thinking about stealing it for myself. I'm just like, that was amazing. Okay.
So I wonder if
have breakfast.
I wonder if there's, and I hate like engaging in national stereotypes, but like I wonder if there's an American component to this because like part of what
Well,
I
I
think,
wonder if it's an educational component, right? Like I think you guys have probably been taught to think this way, whereas I didn't go to school in the way that you have.
I went to a lot of school, but none of it was scholarly. Like, I went to a bunch of art school basically, so I didn't even get like a proper. And Jonathan too. Like, your advanced degree is an MFA as well. So like,
yeah, and I think the what ends up happening is that like for people, for those of us who do kind of get involved in the analysis, is like we're chasing some promise, we're chasing some potential that never really manifests.
You're going to the manifest destiny. You're going to the West.
I
Is
hope
that what
not,
it is?
but like what I was thinking of more is like the stereotype about like the work ethic and having to be productive.
Ah,
And so if I'm reading a fun novel or even watching a movie or even maybe reading a nonfiction book, like I feel like I know what I'm doing, what the purpose of it is. Like it's to entertain myself, it's to like calm myself, it's to absorb myself. or with sometimes with nonfiction, it's to learn something. I'm going to be more knowledgeable once I've read this. And I don't know if it's because poems are short or because of sort of the cultural packaging they come in, but I feel like I genuinely don't know if I try and like think about it, and I do end up thinking about it because I just I worry about things. I genuinely don't know like why I was reading this thing or like what the point is. And I know it's maybe silly to think that there should be a point, but there's um there's an idea that gets talked about a lot in political science, revealed preferences. You know, like if you're polling people, they might tell you, I really value peace and kindness. But then, you know, they go out every afternoon with a baseball bat and, you know, whack their neighbors over the head. The revealed preference is for violence, not for peace. And I've had in mind for years this idea of something. I don't know how you could do it and get honest answers, but I would love to do like just a sort of revealed preference exercise in people's relationships with poems. Like sometimes you know, like
Yeah.
I hand you an individual poem or I hand you a book of poems. Literally, what do you do?
I think the revealed preference is television.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
revealed
I
preference is
don't.
I hand you a book of
Don't
poems
do
and you put it down and
anything.
turn on the TV.
I
Yeah.
put
right.
it
Like when you're
down.
when you're interacting with the book of poems, you're doing a thing that is you're satisfying a different need, right? A need to fulfill some duty, a need to fulfill some social obligation, a need to fulfill some sense of personal meaning. But what you actually want to do, and I like it may not be as simple as like your base desires versus your higher desires, but I think very few people are go to poetry actually for pleasure, or even allow themselves to go to poetry for pleasure.
Yeah, yeah. I have a question though, but going back to what you're saying just before, Jonathan, like if you have that moment of pleasure with a poem,
Mhm.
makes you feel something, do you trust that? Is that
No.
is that
Wait,
enough? You
I
don't.
mean,
So there's like
I don't trust myself. So,
okay,
no, I mean, yeah, yes, I trust it as like a starting point. Like,
a starting point. So that's not good enough on its own as an experience.
I mean, while I'm experiencing it, yes,
Hmm.
but then once I'm done, it's like, well, that if it's just that, it feels kind of masturbatory, or I fear it is. You know,
when you're reading or when you're
no,
writing.
so for instance, yeah, I've been reading Walcott, like going through his stuff. And so what I typically do, especially when I'm reading like a lot of work by somebody, is I'll kind of go through the first time and give everything one read or maybe two. And I'm like, oh, I like that one. I'll, you know, dog ear it and keep moving on. And then like, okay, now I'll go back for a second read and just read the stuff that I've dog eared. But like, so with that, part of what I'm doing is I have in mind that I'm going to write an essay about Walcott at some point. So that kind of makes it feel purposeful. Or you know,
Purposeful.
I'm sorry.
Purposeful. So
Yeah,
that seems like a
exactly.
key word. Yeah.
Yeah. Or so the other day, you know, I read one that I really liked and I took a picture of and I sent it to the two of you. Like, and I do wonder a little bit if one contributing factor for me, and this is clearly just turning into an episode where I ask Alice and Matthew to diagnose me, but like most of my friends are not poetry people. Like I don't exist in a like poetry context, so it doesn't it's not part of this thing where I'm like, well, I'm doing this thing that I and my friends do. It's I'm doing this thing, so I'm trying to make it have some valence that extends beyond me.
Okay.
Like
I'm
if you were to
starting.
if you read it on your own and you don't make a note or make a mental note to attach it to something outside of that experience later, then it feels like isolating or lost or
Yeah. And my hunch is that I'm not as much of a weirdo as I am, that that impulse or that potential is not really that unique. And I think a lot of what happens in different poetry cultures is really different ways of responding to that. And I kind of suspect the birds are another version of this, like, and that we end up creating all these weird systems and goals that get us away from pleasure, away from an experience of meaning, uh, because we're trying to make it purposeful. And like, I do think part of the way, that art comes down to us, like supposedly high art comes down to us, is that this is, to go back to Matthew's thing, this is like nutritious. This is great, cultural significance, or timeless, or all these things. And so I do think that's a little bit written into our experience, that we're doing this for something other than just pleasure.
There's a line in The Way of the Gun, the much maligned second movie by the guy who wrote The Usual Suspects. I think it's much better, but whatever. Nobody liked it. There's a
Agreed.
line, James Caan line. He says, "$15 million isn't money; it's a motive with a universal adapter on it." And in a way, like, it sounds, what you're suggesting, what you're saying, suggesting to me that like poetry might be kind of like the opposite of that. Like poetry, like $15 million is a motive with a universal adapter on it, because you can use it for so many different, like, it's so useful. It's so, you can apply it to almost any desire, almost any goal. Poetry is so inert. It's like a rock. Like, there's so little you can apply it to, but because it seems so useless, we can sort of, like, people end up trying to use it for any number of different things. We'll put it to lots of different ostensible uses.
Except that it's a rock that we think of as a holy grail. It's like,
Right. It's almost like the other way around. Like, a bag full of money doesn't have any aura of importance, but it has a great deal of utility. Whereas poetry has a great aura of utility, or aura of importance, but no the practical utility. And so, but we end up still trying to sort of plug it into various tasks or various agendas.
yeah. And one thing that I'm thinking about as we talk about this, Alice, is and I'm going to get I don't remember the year, but that generation of Australian poets that you're invested in.
The 68ers, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like part of their whole thing is casting all that off, sort of throwing away all that encumbrance and creating something that is supposed to be more immediate, or sort of like alive just in its own moment of encounter.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to cast off a British tradition, and they're looking at you guys and saying, "Look at them! They're writing in their own idiom, and they're just doing whatever the fuck they want. I want to do that too." So yeah, I suppose it does exist in the moment of its creation, but
like the cardinal sin you could commit in Australian poetry, and maybe in like Australian culture at large, is putting on airs, right? Like, that's sort of the greatest offense. I mean, not that clearly, like, there you could murder somebody, but like in terms of like things that people have anxiety about, things that people are sort of especially careful about, that is a particularly, like that is something that everybody recognizes intuitively as like, oh, well, what you don't want to do is come off as making yourself seem important.
yeah, it's funny because you guys often, when you talk, you say like, "Oh, I'm afraid I'm coming off like I'm an asshole." Like, that seems to be the word that you're particularly worried about, whereas we are like, "Oh, I don't want to be a wanker." That is like, that's the word. That is the one you want to stay away from. Like, so I read about the birds,
The
and I'm
wanker
like,
is a masturbator, right? Like, that's,
yeah,
yeah. So I'm wondering,
yeah.
I don't know how deep the etymology
we,
goes,
we,
but
keep, we keep coming back to that for some
right,
reason.
yeah.
Let's just go with
There
it.
was there wasn't that a Team America World Police theme where there's like the world is divided into dicks, pussies, and assholes, depending on like who's
Yeah,
victimizing
yeah.
whom.
Yeah, I think that's right. think that's right. But yeah, so I read about the birds and I'm like, "Ah, fucking wankers. Like, why are they making such a song and dance about just going to the art gallery and liking art? Like, just don't worry about it so much." But I like that you like it, Jonathan. I think that's,
I mean, I don't,
I see the angle from which you're coming at it.
I don't like it. It's kind of cringe to me, but it's like, it's a cringe that I'm jealous of. Like,
Right.
you've talked about the classes you take, like the adult classes that you take the university, and like I'm so jealous of those. And so sometime in the past year, I heard that there was a place in Durham that was doing this thing where they were, it was a bar, I think, and they were offering like kind of like night classes for adults. I was like, that's great. I would love to just go and like learn about something with other adults and talk to them about it and share that.
Mm.
To make some of these sort of esoteric things that I do more communal. And then I looked at the course offerings, and one of them is like, why capitalism is the worst system ever invented. And I was like,
Okay.
well, okay, it may be, but I don't feel like there's going to be much room for us to maneuver in there. Like, um, we're not really going to be exploring things if that's the purpose of the class.
You'd just be furiously agreeing over cocktails.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Feeling righteous about our condemnation of capitalism. And so I think that's this constant struggle for me, is like I do think a lot of my taste, my way of thinking about poetry is idiosyncratic, or to put it in plain terms, like I do think I'm a weirdo. And like in some ways I've been able to protect that by just having lots of friends who aren't poetry people, and so it doesn't really matter. But I do wish I had more of a sense of like this weird thing. And I think that's one thing that maybe motivates me a little bit in writing about poems. One is just having a sense of belonging and purpose and identity. But another one is I do want to make a case for my kinks. I do want to make a case that, so that Matthew, the piece that I wrote about the Olivares book is out now.
Oh, good,
And
good. Where is it?
on the seawall.
Oh, yeah, good.
And
Yeah,
so like,
yeah.
seven people or fewer will read it. But part of my motivation there is to make a case for poetry that's fun, and poetry that's not. I mean, I think those poems, the best of those poems, do much more than entertain. They're more than just fun.
And just for anybody listening, like that's an essay I like cited it about 10 times before it was even published. I do very much recommend it. And I disagree with much of it, but I think it's like very, very worth reading. And eventually I do want to do a lengthier response to Olivares' book myself, but like, do go read this essay. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, and so like, I want to have like a place where we can all come together and talk about these things, and also where it's okay that I don't necessarily agree with everybody else.
Yeah.
Well, it sort of sounds like what you're describing is this right now.
Yes, which is, I mean, like that's the big reveal, is that I sent you all this article so that we could get together and talk about me.
Okay.
We are unwittingly participating in an action of the Order of the Third Berg. That was the first half of my conversation with Jonathan and Alice. You can listen to the second half on The Secret Show now at SLEERICKETS.substack.com. You can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.